welcome to episode 163 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Andrew Swafford,
Andrea Aswahe,
and we are also joined by our special guest, Mr. William Mahaffey of the Knoxville Horror Film Festival. William, thank you for making this a yearly tradition.
No problem. Thanks for having me back.
So in this episode, we will be doing our usual movies we saw this week in part 1, and in part 2, we will be talking about 1977's Suspiria as part of our October horror series. It'll be our kickoff, and it's also going to be kind of in conjunction with the Knox Horror Fest, which is going to be showing the 4K re-release. Is that correct?
That's correct. The 4K restoration done by Synapse Films.
All right. Very cool. Let's go ahead and get into movies that we saw this week. We're going to go ahead and jump in with a movie that we talked about last week, but we kind of have two new, fresh perspectives on it. So we wanted to talk about it again, and that is Mother, the latest from Darren Aronofsky, and it stars Jennifer Lawrence and Javier Bardem. And like we said last week, they play a married couple, and a lot of guests come over to their house, and they have to deal with those guest. And I feel like
that's
that is the best.
That's a really nice way to put that.
I feel like that's the best way to describe this movie. But yeah, Andrea and William, you guys saw this and seemed to be, much more, bigger fans of this than kind of we were. I feel like Andrew liked it. I was a little mellow, and Jessica seemed to kind of have issues with it. She talked about that last week, but I'm kind of curious to hear what you guys had to say. Andrea, what was your feelings about Mother?
I actually really love this movie. I think I am kind of biased, though. I am a really big fan of Darren Aronofsky, so I was going to see this movie regardless of what it was being said about it, called, the worst film of the century and F rating, et cetera, et cetera. So I was already planning on seeing this movie. And I really, really, I really loved it, to be honest. I actually grew quite emotional during it because I was viewing it through more of a gender studies lens than probably the more overt biblical and environmental aspects, which come through quite clearly, those two, along with kind of the exploration of fame and things like that. But just seeing how the kind of the exploration of the woman being just perpetually used as an object, degraded by man, having her creations destroyed and taken advantage of is so powerful to see. It's violent. It's really disturbing at times, obviously, but I think it's something that for me, it was, it did make me very emotional. And I think that was a really, I thought it was really moving, actually.
You said that you're a big fan of Aronofsky.
Yeah.
What does this rank highly in terms of his other films, or where would you rank Mother compared to the rest of his work?
I haven't thought that much about the rankings yet. I actually have been still processing the different angles of this movie. But when I think of it, I think it would fall more near, I guess, high middle of sorts. There are movies of his that I didn't particularly enjoy. I didn't like The Fountain. And I wasn't too hot on Noah, but I enjoyed. It's hard to say enjoy, right? Because it's not a movie that you go and say oh, I enjoyed watching this film. But I really saw it as a beautiful piece of art, and I really appreciated it. Similar to, I don't know, maybe something like Pi. That it's not something that I go out of my way to see, but I see it as a beautiful piece of art. But not as something that's as watchable as something like Black Swan or The Wrestler. So I don't know. It's hard to rank these movies, I think.
Sure. William, what about you?
I agree with most of the stuff she said. One thing that I really liked about the movie was like how layered it was and how many different things you could take away from it. Like, I think maybe the most obvious thing is the biblical references in it, but I was so focused on what it was saying about the oppression of women and the environmental commentary in it. For some reason, I fixated on those two. That like the very overt biblical references didn't hit me until like towards the end of the movie, and I felt like an idiot for not catching on to it earlier. But it's definitely a film that I've really enjoyed talking about and thinking about with people afterwards. But I don't know if it'll make like my favorite of the year or anything, or I don't know how soon I want to rewatch it again. But I really enjoyed it, and I thought that all the performance is really good. And probably my favorite thing about it was that I felt like it felt really raw and angry. It kind of reminded me of something like Salo or a Serbian film. Like, obviously those films are probably way more messed up than it, but I think with all three of those films, you can just feel this like really intense anger and frustration about the worlds that these directors live in. And even if you don't know the full context of it, like say if you watch somebody watched Mother like 20 years from now, like how I watched Salo and I didn't know, all the political references in it. I still could feel this like anger in it. And I think Mother has that same type of thing. And probably with time, it'll feel like an even better film than it is.
Well, I guess if you are curious about Mother, and I feel like that's probably the best way to describe it, if you're very curious about this movie and kind of, I think we talked about it last week, but it's one that definitely I would go to a theater and have people in the have like people in the theater with you and kind of just experience it as a group, because I think that just watching others react and kind of how you react is one of the more entertaining qualities of Mother as a whole. But it's still in theaters now if you want to check it out. One of the other new releases of this past week was Kingsman: The Golden Circle, the sequel to the hit blockbuster of a couple years ago. It's directed and written by Matthew Vaughn of Kick-Ass and X-Men: The First Class fame. But William, you saw this. Did you see were you a fan of the first Kingsman movie?
Yeah, and actually it was a movie that I didn't think looked very good, and I'm kind of mixed on Matthew Vaughn. I think he's a pretty interesting director, but I don't know if any of his films are 100% successful for me. But that was one that I just thought looked bad, but I went to see it, and I ended up really enjoying it. And I think I don't know if you guys have seen it, but there's an action scene in a church. I think it's like one of the best action scenes from the last couple of years. And I thought the movie was like kind of shocking and daring in a way that I wouldn't expect a mainstream comic book movie to be. But so yeah, I liked it. And I enjoyed this one. I think that it kind of lost some of the bite of the first one, and it introduced a lot of new things to it, like Channing Tatum's character and this whole other group of spies based on cowboys. And it had a lot of different actors in it, but it just seemed like none of that stuff really gelled or came to life that well. I think the characters from the first movie, all of their interactions and stuff still worked, and I think it would have been better if they just focused on them and instead of adding this huge cast. But despite all that, it was still really fun, and it's got some really clever sequences in it. And Elton John was probably the best new character in the movie.
I feel like people say that about Elton John just in general. It's like he's the best person in this whatever we're talking about.
Well, when he first showed up, it just seems like it's going to be like a dumb. I mean, it kind of is a dumb cameo, but they take it so far, and he does so much in the movie that it was really funny. And so I think it's worth checking out. It's just it's not one that I'll probably go back to a lot.
I was a big. I really enjoyed the first Kingsman movie. I think that, like you said, there are some inventive action sequences. Matthew Vaughn has this. I think he's a more refined version of like Zack Snyder. He does Zack Snyder-y things in terms of how he structures his action, but I think that he does it. I think he's a little more creative and doesn't just. It's not just about loud noises and feeling the punches. I think that there's some kind of artistry to how he structures the characters moving around in the sequences. I don't know, this one definitely had some bad press before, just like review wise beforehand, and it kind of burnt me out on going to the theater to actually watch it, but I don't know. I kind of beforehand was like, I mean, it can't be the worst thing of all time. Channing Tatum's a cowboy in it and does cowboy things, so that seems like a nice driving force.
I'll watch anything with
right?
Channing
That's
Tatum
what I
as a
thought.
cowboy.
Yeah,
I'm in. I mean, come on.
But Kingsman: The Golden Circle. It is in theaters now. I guess if you want to watch Channing Tatum as a cowboy and etc. I don't know what else. I think that's.
I've heard he's only in it for like 5 or 10
very
minutes.
disappointing.
Is that true, William?
Yeah, he's not in it that much.
Yeah, that's not a selling point.
He does have a pretty funny dancing scene.
Well,
Well, if you only get 10 minutes, that's a good way to
exactly.
spend
Well,
it.
we got Channing Tatum for 10 minutes, so let's make him be a cowboy and he'll dance at one point. I feel like that's a wonderful use of his time, honestly. I'm not sarcastically.
I'm in for that.
All right. Well, I wanted to talk real quickly about a movie that just came on Netflix that I'm sure a lot of people saw earlier this year, and that is is Beauty and the Beast, the live action whatever of the Disney classic. But it's I don't know how to describe. It's not like a reboot or something. It's pretty much just like it's like they just livened up the cartoon. It's directed by Bill Condon, and it's the script comes from Stephen Chbosky, who did Perks of Being a Wallflower. And a couple of other screenplay people who doesn't really matter. It stars Emma Watson as Belle, Dan Stevens as the Beast. It also stars Luke Evans, Josh Gad, Kevin Kline, Ewan McGregor as a French guy for some reason, Ian McKellen, Emma Thompson, Stanley Tucci, our Lord and Savior, as a CGI piano, which honestly was like legitimately a crime against humanity, because why would you cast Stanley Tucci in a movie and make him be a CGI freaking piano for 75% of this movie? Like, we want to see Stanley Tucci's face, because then he comes back to being a human, and he does like that wink thing that he does, and I'm like, damn, man. Stanley Tucci. I'm doing the little Catholic Church, the little Catholic Church thing. But this movie is pretty much, they took the animated film, which fantastic, was a fantastic movie. The animated Beauty and the Beast is a classic masterpiece. All the et cetera. But this one is pretty much them taking that and just putting live characters in it. They add a few songs and such, but I don't know. For the most part, it was incredible. I was struggling in the first 5 minutes, because this movie opens and they have this lavish ball sequence when they're showing the prince or the king or whatever the hell he is, before he's turned into the Beast, and it kind of just feels like a Disney version of Marie Antoinette, because you have all of these characters like with these giant wigs and giant dresses and lavish tuxes, and I was kind of like, I'm sitting there just watching that, and I was like, I'd rather just watch Marie Antoinette. I don't know why anybody's watching this at this point. If I was like in the theater, I'd just shut that off and turn on Marie Antoinette. So they have this sequence, and then they go into, he's turned into the Beast, and then they have the title thing go, and then they go to the city in, let me just say, quotation marks, France. It's not French. They're all speaking in English accents. That's a lie.
Oh my god!
And they have like the introduction to Belle, where she walks around the city and sings. And I'm I'm sitting there thinking, you know, I've seen pretty much all of Jacques Demy's movies, specifically The Young Girls of Rochefort, and you know, why couldn't it, like, just make it that? Like, why is it like, because this one, I said this on Twitter, but Emma Watson couldn't hold the hem of Catherine Deneuve's dress. Like, Catherine Deneuve should, like, they should have just like CGI Tupac'd her into this movie. Yeah,
like they should have hologrammed her in.
Catherine Deneuve is still alive. She could be in this movie as an elderly Belle.
That's fine. Yeah,
that'd be great. Elderly
I'd rather
Belle.
watch her.
I think that would be an interesting twist on this movie.
No, if I don't hate Emma Watson, but like she just wasn't like it wasn't happening. But she's like, you know, she's running around this town. People are singing. I don't know. I'm just kind of like there's something I was thinking, and I'm like, there's something about like the opening number in Young Girls of Rochefort where, you know, they're in the town and you have all of these, you know, colors, and everybody, you know, just pops out with colors, and they have these just they're very pinpoint, refined dancing, but they also have this kind of groove to them that you kind of you move around with you know, with the dance numbers. It doesn't feel like it's some completely choreographed, orchestrated thing, even though it is. And this one just feels like you know, kind of some, you know, theater kid porn where, you know, you have them, you know, the moves so well it's almost kind of boring. And so the opening scene, it's just this lifeless opening sequence, and then, you know, we fumble through all of the rest of this plot. I will say that even though this movie's not very good, Luke Evans as Gaston is absolutely wonderful. He just completely hams it up and goes 150% into this, like, you know, rogue rapscallion man. It's wonderful. I loved every second of that. And then Josh Gad would poke his head out and ruin everything. But yeah, overall, Beauty and the Beast, it kind of is like the worst case scenario with these Disney live action adaptations of their animated classics, where you recognize just how powerful and how essential animation can be, without really, you know, this shows that, yeah, Beauty and the Beast didn't initially have to be animated. You could have made a live action version of it and it would have worked fine. But there's something much more fantastical and magical about the animated version, where you're able to kind of play with the form and add, you know, add these small elements that make it something that you kind of feel like you haven't seen before. And this one feels just tired, and you're constantly kind of going, yeah, I've seen this before. And it honestly just kind of feels like they took BuzzFeed and then meshed it up into a ball and put it in some cauldron and stirred the cauldron around, and then a bunch of GIFs and memes and you know, hot AF headlines came out, and this is what popped out, and they put it in a movie theater, because it just feels like this was created to make like a week of content for BuzzFeed.
Is this still the highest grossing film of 2017?
I can check. Let me look for you. Well,
while you're looking, I just want to add, I haven't seen this adaptation. I'm just going to call it that, because I guess it can't technically a remake because it's a cartoon, so it's weird. But I mean, I would say that, you know, if we want something like a Jacques Demy musical, I mean, you have to strip it of the fact that it's a Disney Inc. production. You can't have something like that. You know what I mean? So, like, I would say that, of course, I think it would be a gorgeous, because let's take the Broadway musical. You know, if it's a beautiful stage production, but you know, it's so catered to the group, like the audience that it was made for, that it doesn't take any risks, because what's the point of taking risk, right?
Sure, yeah.
You know, and so, like, I think that's a shame for movies like that, because this is the, when you make that crossover and your fans are older now and they can maybe appreciate it a little more. And I think, I saw some interviews about Emma Watson saying that she wanted to, I haven't seen the movie, but that she takes on the role of the inventor from her father, and this whole thing about being a little bit more of a liberated Belle rather than this.
Yeah,
weird,
I think she carries books around to be smart or something. I don't know. I lost interest halfway through the opening song.
Yeah. And so, I just think that it could have been more, but it caters exactly to the audience that wanted it. And for the people who, like me, who weren't interested, will probably never see it.
And I 100% get that. I just avoided the going. I understand that it says Disney's Beauty and the Beast, so of course there's going to be this level of laziness to it, because they know that we as a people are stupid enough that we'll flock to that thing in hordes just because of the title on it and the fact that they created it. So they're I guess good for them. They're smart in that regard. To answer your question, Andrew, yes, it's still the highest grossing movie of the year. It's about $100 million over Wonder Woman, but I don't know. I think my issue, and I think that Disney can still do this within its sphere of being Disney, because I've seen Disney movies that have this quality, but I think that what this was lacking was that, again, inventive sense of wonder. It never felt fantastical. It never felt like something like you were just transported into this world. It felt like you were transported into something familiar and boring, and at the end I was just kind of like, well, just watch the original animated film. What was the point of watching this? And so I'm kind of like, Disney, if you're gonna do this, at least try to add something. I'll say though, I did enjoy the Jungle Book live action adaptation that they had last year or whatever. I never saw the Cinderella one, but I did like the Jungle Book one. I thought added a few elements to kind of make it something unique to the animated original. But this one just seemed tired and old. And honestly, I mean, it's probably because Bill Condon directed. I mean, please, like what innovative, imaginative thing has Bill Condon ever directed? Good luck, Bride of Frankenstein.
Well, we talked about it last year when Jungle
Monsters
Book
is awesome.
That's a good movie, but it's like, I'm not going to credit Bill Condon on that one. I'm going to give Ian McKellen his due on that on Gods and Monsters.
Candyman 2.
Are we watching Candyman 2? And
we're watching Candyman 1 for the horror series.
Oh, okay.
But I was about to say, when we talked about Jungle Book last year, we talked a lot about how that is a live action adaptation in name only, sort of, because you have this one human boy and basically everything else in the movie is animated. I imagine that that's not necessarily the case for Beauty and the Beast, where you have an animated beast and animated, cups and things like that. But most of it is real locations, right?
It is once we get to the Beast's castle, because the Beast, of course, is animated, and then all the little, Lumiere and Cogsworth, all those guys are all animated. And honestly,
they're real sets, right?
No, it had to be
Seriously?
CGI because it looks really bad. When I was watching, I was like this. I was like the background in this looks awful because it just looks like they were green screening the entire thing. That was really disappointing as well.
Strong recommendation from Zach there.
Yeah, it's on Netflix now if you wanna do this. I don't know if I'm the person who should be like, you're like, Beauty and the Beast. Should I?
What does Zach think?
What does Zach think about Beauty and the Beast? He'll give me exactly what I want to know. But yeah, that's on Netflix if you want to check it out. I do not recommend it. I say go to a Disney movie that's also on Netflix that came out last year that does have magic and wonder, and that is Pete's Dragon. People should go watch Pete's Dragon. It's wonderful. All right, with that, we're going to take a short break. We will be back in part 2 talking about Suspiria, so stick around.
Hey Cinematariats, this is your co-host Lydia Creech with an important message during this break in the show. Cinematary would like you to know that we do not want your money, and we don't want to place ads in the show at this time either. That's not why we do this. We do it because we enjoy each other's company, and we want to bring you our pure, unadulterated opinions on the world of cinema. However, there are a few things you can do to help out the show that we would greatly appreciate. First, leave us a review on iTunes, 4 or 5 stars only, to help us reach more listeners per the algorithm gods. Secondly, send us a tweet at Cinematary, or better yet, send us an email at zach@cinematary.com. That's Zach, Z-A-C-H, so we can hear from you guys for a change. I'd especially like to hear if you're a human and not an android who also likes Blade Runner, or maybe you have a suggestion of a movie you would really like to hear our opinions on. Regardless, let us know your thoughts and we will read them out and respond to them on future episodes of the show. Finally, please share the show with friends and members of your family who you think would enjoy listening to and participating in our film discussions that we bring to you guys every week. So, to recap, review, send us your thoughts through Twitter and email, and please share with your friends and family. We would greatly appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Now back to the show.
Episode 163 of Cinematary. In this part, we will be beginning our October horror series with 1977's Suspiria. It's directed by Dario Argento from a script by Argento and Daria Nicolodi. It is based on the 1845 essay by Thomas de Quincey titled Suspiria de Profundis, or Sighs from the Depths. It should have been called Sighs from the Depths. That's what they should.
It's based on an essay? What is the essay about?
Sighs from the Depths.
Okay, thank you.
It's somebody like deep underwater, and then they go, huh, and then they assess that. I don't know.
I'm glad you did your research, Seth.
The film stars Jessica Harper as an American ballet student who transfers to a prestigious dance academy in Germany, but later realizes that the academy is a front for something far more sinister and supernatural amidst a series of murders. The film also stars Stefania Cassini, Flavio Bucci, Miguel Bosé, Alida Valli, Udo Kier, and Joan Bennett in her final film role. The film is the first of the trilogy Argento refers to as The Three Mothers, followed by 1980's Inferno and 2007's The Mother of Tears. The title and general concept of The Three Mothers came from Suspiria de Profundis, the uncredited inspiration for the film. There's a section in the book entitled Lavana and Our Ladies of Sorrow. The piece asserts that just as there are 3 fates and 3 graces, there are 3 sorrows. Here we go. This is where I'm going to start butchering. Mater Lacrimarum, Our Lady of Tears. What? Are you going to say it correctly?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's Mater Lacrimarum. And
you see, you just said it. You just kind of added like a little like. Okay, go ahead.
Lacrimarum, Our Lady of Tears. So it's in Latin. Mater Suspiriorum.
Yeah.
And Mater Tenebrarum.
And those are Our Lady of Sighs and Our Lady of Darkness. Today's Latin lesson brought to you by Andrea.
Fortunately, people don't speak Latin, so I don't think anyone's
it's a dead language. Who cares? Scriptwriter Daria Nicolodi stated that Suspiria's inspiration came from a tale her grandmother told her as a young child about a real-life experience she had in an acting academy where she discovered, quote, the teachers were teaching arts, but also black magic. The story was later said by Argento to have been made up. The film was made with anamorphic lenses. The production design and cinematography emphasized vivid primary colors, particularly red, creating a deliberately unrealistic nightmarish setting, emphasized by the use of Technicolor prints. This Technicolor process used for The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind is much more vivid in its color rendition than emulsion-based release prints, therefore enhancing the nightmarish quality of the film. It was also one of the final feature films to be processed in Technicolor. Italian prog rock band Goblin composed most of the film's musical score in collaboration with Argento himself. Goblin had previously scored Argento's earlier film Deep Red, as well as several subsequent films following Suspiria. Like Ennio Morricone's compositions for Sergio Leone, Goblin's score for Suspiria was created before the film was shot. It has been reused in multiple Hong Kong films, including Yuen Wu-Ping's martial arts film Dance of the Drunk Mantis in 1979, and Sue Hart's horror comedy We're Going to Eat You in 1980. The main title theme was named as one of the best songs released between 1977 and 1979 in the book The Pitchfork 500, Our Guide to the Greatest Songs from Punk to the Present. In the Suspiria 25th anniversary documentary, Jessica Harper commented on the fact that while making Suspiria, as was the common practice in Italian filmmaking at the time, the actor's dialogue was not properly recorded, but was later dubbed through ADR or additional dialogue recording. She also recalled that part of the reason for this was because each actor spoke their native language. For instance, Harper, Valli, and Bennett spoke English, Cassini, Valli, and Bucci spoke Italian, and several others spoke German. And as each actor generally knew what the other was saying anyway, they each responded with their lines as if they had understood the other. Argento also expressed disappointment over the fact that Harper's voice, which he liked, was not heard in the Italian market as she was dubbed in Italian by another actress. In 1977, the New York Times said that Mr. Argento's methods make potentially stomach-turning material more interesting than it ought to be. Shooting on bold, very fake-looking sets, he uses bright primary colors and stark lines to create a campy, surreal atmosphere, and his distorted camera angles and crazy lighting turn out to be much more memorable than the carnage. Suspiria is really quite funny during those isolated interludes when nobody is bleeding. The Chicago Reader in 2002 said that Argento worked so hard for his effects, throwing around shock cuts, colored lights, and peculiar camera angles that it would be impolite not to be a little frightened. And of course, a remake of this film is set to come out this year, directed by Luca Guadagnino, and is starring Tilda Swinton, Dakota Johnson, and Chloe Grace Moretz. This version will be set in 1977 and in Berlin, with the focus, according to Guadagnino, on the concept of motherhood and about the uncompromising force of motherhood. And Jessica Harper, the star of the original, has a small part in that. On that note, though, William, we brought you on to kind of talk about this since this is playing in the Knoxville Horror Film Festival. So, other than the fact that they have this, pristine, brand new, gorgeous print of the film, what about Suspiria, kind of, makes you go, this needs to be featured in the festival?
Well, for one, whoever said whatever the first quote you pulled from said it was campy. I completely disagree with that, but I think it was
the New York Times, so they give them
they got their noses up in the air.
That's true.
I mean, it's one of my favorite horror films. I think that for a lot of people it might not work because I think it's less about the story, it's more about the mood that it creates and the visuals, and it's kind of like something like a nightmare or a fairy tale where, reality doesn't really come into play. And I think for people who are more average film goers, it might not be something that they're into. But if you're like into not just horror, but you're into like more experimental film, I think it really works. And I think there are sequences in this movie that have never been topped. In terms of like grand horror set pieces, like there's the sequence almost at the start of the film where the girl is pushed through the stained glass. Like every time I see this sequence, it blows my mind. And in terms of them saying it's campy, I can see how there are like little parts of it that don't play that well, like the dubbing. I mean, that's just a factor of like Italian horror films and really Italian films in general. Like even Fellini said that you find your face and you find your voice. So all kinds of filmmakers were doing that then. And if they're on a lower budget, like a lot of horror films were, then it's more noticeable. But it's almost hard to like describe what it is about this film that's just so magical. It's just like, everything is firing on all cylinders, like the camera work, and especially the soundtrack. Like the soundtrack is such a key part that if you listen to the score separately from the movie, there's probably things in it that you would think is part of the sound design of the movie, but it just all like mixes together so well that it just really enhances it, like little witch sounding voices or little moans and stuff here and there that you think that it's something that somebody's hearing is really just part of the score. But I mean, like I said, it's one of my favorite horror movies, and this 4K restoration that Synapse is working on, they've been working on it for 3 years, and they had the cinematographer Luciano Tovoli supervise it entirely. He approved every frame of the restoration, and I haven't seen it yet, but I've had several friends that have, and they said that besides being visually completely different than what you've seen before in a lot of scenes, there's so much stuff in the sound design that you never even heard before on the versions of it. And I mean, right now there's a DVD and there's some kind of 4K restoration that happened in Europe, but apparently it's pretty subpar. So like, I can't wait to see this version. I've seen stills, and it's going to be pretty transformative, I think.
Yeah. Andrew, I'm curious because I know you saw a print of it at the Belcourt in Nashville. So what was your experience like with that one?
Yeah, so there's this newly discovered celluloid print of the film in Italian that I guess had been, I don't know, lost for 30 odd years. And one of the key things is the fact that it is in Italian. So there's still dubbing, just like all Italian film, like William said, but it's not dubbing in English, which I think that having the layer of removal through subtitles kind of helps you ignore the dubbing a little bit if you find that a problem. But mostly the pros to seeing it on celluloid at the Belcourt were it really emphasizes just how loud that score is. Like I completely agree with you and William that the score by Goblin is one of the absolute greatest things about this movie, and it is mixed so loudly. It is mixed about twice as loud as the dialogue in the film, and the first time I watched it I was just like having to constantly turn the volume up and down to keep from getting noise complaints from people living next to me in my apartment. But seeing it in the theater, just like letting the speakers blare is quite an experience. And then the other thing is just being able to see it with people who will laugh at the right moments and gasp at the right moments, because it is such a sensory overload of a movie. I think it helps to watch it with a crowd. So I'm really excited about coming out again just less than a month later to the Knoxville Horror Film Festival and watching it on the Blu-ray, or not the Blu-ray, but the 4K restoration. One of the reasons why I'm definitely going to see it a second time is because the celluloid print doesn't actually look that great. Like it was a really awesome sensory experience, really great auditory experience, but it is old, it is kind of faded, it is very much tinted red, and much of the film is red. It has a vibrant primary colors all throughout, like you said, Zach, but there's also a lot of blues and greens and yellows that do get overshadowed a bit in that faded celluloid cut. So I'm really stoked to see the digital copy and hopefully to get that Blu-ray when it comes out later this year.
Yeah. Andrea, you said that this was your first time seeing this in a while. Well, coming back to it after so long, what was your impressions of the movie?
Yeah, I actually saw this movie about 10 years ago, and when I was in college, and when once upon a time you would get DVDs from Netflix, and that's how I got it, because there were so many art films on Netflix and not de-releases.
That's crazy.
I know, right? And so that's how I got to see this movie. And so I watched it in my college apartment, and in on a crappy TV, and even that just having that experience on a small screen, but I had a similar experience in which I had to turn down the audio mix was so off because the soundtrack, the score is so massive. And so I got to see it again. I think I think what I got was like a 25th anniversary copy or something from Harvard. And they just, I popped it in now I have, this really great TV, and it was like a different experience. The colors were gorgeous, but the sound still, I would love to see this in theaters, to have someone actually, like, if it was ever possible, to strip the sound and remix the sound as it was playing, because the score compared to just the actors speaking, like that dub is insane. But I think what made a big difference was the colors. I could really, really see the colors now. I can see where there's still, like Andrew said, there's so much red, bright red, but I was so much more able to see the deep blues and the shades of blue, and particularly the shades of green, that I didn't really pay attention to the first time. I do remember the reds, but seeing that kind of made for a different experience. And I watched it with my boyfriend on the couch, and he had no idea what we were watching. To watch it with someone who had never, ever seen it before, it was really interesting, because it's such an kind of a old school kind of story, in the sense of, like, spoiler, it's about like witches, right? This like coven. And so just to see that, it's something that wouldn't be made today, especially that you don't reveal kind of that the monster till the very end, and it's literally in the last minutes. It's just that buildup. And I think that was really cool to see something like that in a movie that we really wouldn't see today. So it was cool to be able to see it again.
I agree. I do agree with you. The dub of it, I think it's not really distracting. It didn't really have that much of an effect on me. It was there and I noticed it, but I think that, the power of Suspiria is really just in, the way it sounds, the way it looks, the way it kind of moves around. It has this just quality that it seems to kind of it kind of melts you and directs you toward, where it kind of, wants you to go throughout the plot of the film. I really, I don't know what you guys felt about Jessica Harper as the lead in this. I love that she kind of has this, she has this innocence quality. I don't think she's completely helpless, but I love just that she has this innocence quality. It kind of, there's this charm that she has. But I mean, what did you guys think of, of her as the kind of lead character for this?
I think that. Go ahead. Should I go?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. No, I just wanted to say that I like her, like you said, that she's not a complete damsel in distress, but she's also she's very much us. She is the audience within the school, very clearly. So she's just as confused as we are. But she's not naive that there is something going on. And she can pick up on things just as we are picking up on things. And I find that that's a really good vehicle for the movie. Like, we see it through her from the outside, but also through her eyes. And because we're not as naive as maybe horror, as a horror audience ought to be, in a sense.
And I don't know how this necessarily affects our experience with her as the audience surrogate, but she doesn't really do anything over the course of the movie. She has a lot of things explained to her. Like, she goes and sees the expert on witches at the nearby university, and he talks at her for 5 minutes or so, which is, they find a great way to stage that shot, which it could be very uninteresting. But at one point you're watching, the camera zooms in through the two faces, and then you start just watching the reflection for the rest of the scene. That's great. But in addition to that, you also have the first 45 minutes, hour of the movie is her one friend in the dance academy explaining to her all of the rumors and the mythology around the coven that may or may not be the shadow government of this dance studio. And Jessica Harper doesn't quite do anything until the end, where her life is in danger and she's just wandering around this place. I guess that could go along with the idea of her as audience surrogate, because we only know like what the director tells us visually through the mise-en-scène of the film. We are helpless like Jessica Harper. But I do think that I don't necessarily want to put this movie through any sort of like gender scrutiny or anything like that, because I ultimately think this movie is about nothing, and that's fine. But if you were to put it through its paces in that way, I don't think it's necessarily a feminist horror film like so many great horror films like Rosemary's Baby or Psycho or whatever would be.
But I also feel like, I think you're right. It's not a film that really begs to be put through that kind of assessment, because I think that the effectiveness of Suspiria is it's working on the pistons that make film function as this visual art form. It's the way everything looks. It's when she goes into a hallway and you have Jessica Harper kind of at the end of the hallway, and you almost have these the slanting German expressionist walls with violet and red and just this kind of weird array of colors that all saturate the screen. You have just that soundtrack that's not always booming, but just kind of like humming behind, just waiting to leap out. It has sequences of people jumping into barbed wire rooms, which, why the hell are there barbed wire rooms? That's awful. I hated every second of that sequence. But it's all about the mood. And I think we've said that 1,000 times already. It's only been 20 minutes, but
yes, this podcast is just us naming colors basically.
But I think that isn't that a function of movies isn't that what you want from movies? Don't you want a movie that leads you visually or through sound,
yes,
and makes you feel things? I understand. Yes, we need a concrete story structure to it, and that's equally important. But I think that in this case, it's a film about nothing essentially, and I think that its power is in how it moves you visually and through sound. And I think that that's one of the essentials of really it almost has this silent film-esque quality to it, especially the silent horrors.
I think that's absolutely right. There's one particular scene. I've actually just had Suspiria running on mute in the background while we're doing this podcast today because it is so nice to look at. But there's one particular scene that I think really captures the essence of what it is like to watch Suspiria. So there's this moment where Jessica Harper is walking through the hallway of the dance studio, and she turns a corner and she sees this old woman and a young boy. Doesn't really make sense why they're there, but the old woman is polishing this crystal, and Jessica Harper continues walking through the hallway, and this shimmer of light just catches the crystal, and it like hits Jessica Harper in the eye, and she just sits there for a second, and she's momentarily stunned, and nothing really has transpired. She's just walked from one end of the hallway to the other, but this light has kind of gone through this prism and hit her, and it has had an effect on her. And I really do think that is what it's like to watch Suspiria, because you're following the conflict of it, so to speak. You're not looking for it to tell you anything meaningful. You just kind of get struck by the chromatics of the thing. I don't know how else to put it. But this movie has been kind of a formative film for me. I only saw it like last year, but people who listen to the podcast know that horror is my favorite genre of film, and a lot of times it's because I love the thematics of horror and how it's able to capture cultural anxieties and express them in really visually interesting ways. But I do take issue sometimes with horror movies that aren't about anything, and Suspiria was a movie that kind of knocked me on my ass and told me that that's not necessarily the right way to approach things. You can have a horror film, like you said, Zach, that just guides you along visually and doesn't necessarily need to give you anything else other than these sumptuous colors and lights and sets and things like that. I like to think of it as this cinematic lava lamp. I wrote about this for our Slumber Party horror movies list last October, that you can pay very close attention to it and just like drink in every single detail of the wallpaper and the I don't know, just the frames on the doors and the windows and stuff like that. Or you can just, like I'm doing right now, play it in the background and have it create this like interesting vibe in the room. You just enjoy it on this purely aesthetic level. It is not a like Red Shoes or Black Swan where it's like really delving into what it means to be like a female artist in the world of ballet. It's just... it's just like making this pleasant movie-going experience. William, you've been very quiet for a long time. Do you have any thoughts on any of the things we brought up so far?
No, you guys are saying a lot of interesting stuff. I actually have it going on in the background too, and it just hit the barbed wire room scene. So I was like,
great
staring at that.
That's the worst part. That's scarier than anything else in that movie. Is when she falls in that barbed wire.
Maggots are pretty scary.
No, it's the barbed wire.
Maggots in hair.
I don't know.
No, I can avoid a room of barbed wire. I can't ignore maggots falling from the ceiling into my head. Hell no.
Well, speaking of those sequences, how do you guys feel like the horror elements of this movie are effective? It's not a necessarily a jump out and scare them. It has a couple of those moments, but it kind of has these just very violent, just absurd, sequences of horror. William, you described the sequence at the beginning when she goes through the stained glass, and then but you watch as she's getting like punctured, and then she hits the ground. It's such a violent movie. I think that's really where it kind of derives its horror from. But I mean, what did you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that stuff really works well, and that's one thing that like Italian movies are very notable for, especially Argento and like Lucio Fulci. But like that scene and then the barbed wire scene, there's something about them that makes me think of something like the scene in Texas Chainsaw Massacre where the girl is at the table with the family and they're like, trying to make her or they're trying to get grandpa to hit her on the head with the hammer. Like that is like one of the most disturbing scenes I've ever seen in a movie. But when you describe it to somebody, it doesn't sound like that terrifying. And it's just the reason that it is the way that the sound is designed, the way that the performances are, like, particularly like the looks on the girls' faces. And it's the same thing in Suspiria, like the looks of horror on their face and like just this incredibly strange situation. It's not just that the deaths are incredibly violent. It's like they're so operatic. Like, I mean, she gets her face pushed through glass and then she gets dragged and then pushed through stained glass and being stabbed along the way. And then she's hung. It's like the most awful combination. But then at the same time, the scene is absolutely beautiful. I mean, it's one of the most gorgeous scenes in cinema, I think, but it's also like one of the more horrific scenes. And something about that combination is just is unsettling in a way that, like a few people can capture. Like another person I think captures this who isn't technically a horror director is David Lynch. And I mean, there are scenes in almost every one of his movies where something happens where it's just sound design and something about the image on the screen that just creates this vibe that is so unsettling. And I think Suspiria has a lot of stuff like that. And I haven't heard if he's talked about it, but I feel like you can see influences in some of his films, like with that type of thing and with color. And
well, the scene that I was citing earlier with the old woman and the young boy, I think that is cited directly in Twin Peaks with the Mrs. Chalfant character.
Yeah, totally.
But like we were saying earlier, just like how a lot of these death sequences are so over the top, I would not call them campy, and I would not say that they're going for like, quote unquote creative kills, which is a thing that bothers me when people talk about movies, horror movies. I think that it is, the tagline for this movie that often comes along with it is it's a symphony of horror. I know that's been used to describe Nosferatu as well, but it really does feel like a musical experience, like the director is playing the audience like an orchestra or something like that. It really felt that way to me sitting in the audience at the Belcourt watching it with a huge crowd.
I think that's an interesting point. I see those the kills, whatever you want to call them, the violent deaths. It's almost like a surreal kind of performance art piece.
Yeah.
That a lot of this is such an art film, like an experimental film that maybe it has a very thin plot, but so much about it is just seeing what can happen. And so right. I think a lot of the horror element not only comes from the violence and the soundtrack, but also the fact that we really don't know what's going to happen because they set you up with saying like, well, these are all the ways that we can kill one person and her friend with the stained glass falling from the ceiling. Yeah. So like at any turn, any of these characters could be in danger, and in we don't really know what's going to happen. It's so unpredictable and absurd. Yes. It kind of rises above and just goes into this kind of dreamscape. And so I think that is also unnerving, paired with the score and the colors. And so it's beyond, I see this as such a strong piece of performance art.
Yes. And gosh, what was I about to say? You mentioned, I lost it. I had a really good point I was going to make a second ago. Dang it. It's gone.
Insert smart,
Insert
point
smart
right
comment here.
Yeah.
Come back to me. As
we've talked, about the score some, and we talked about how effective it is. What specifically works with that? You have this prog rock Italian band, Goblin or the Goblins, doing this score, and it seems like we've kind of seen this trend, especially recently, where you have like Johnny Greenwood and Trent Reznor, these musicians who come from maybe a more rock based background to creating film scores, and they kind of create this different ambiance. But it seems like kind of like the Goblins were almost the original version of that. Does that non-traditional aesthetic kind of add to the horror of the film?
I would compare
I think that
it.
Definitely contributes to it. I mean, there's not many scores that sound like this, and that wasn't. Like Goblin had been doing stuff before, and a lot of Morricone's scores for Italian horror were kind of like this, but nothing quite at this level, really.
The only thing I would compare it to recently is the score for the Jim Jarmusch film Only Lovers Left Alive, which is done by Jim Jarmusch's band, Squirrel. And they take these very simple rock riffs and they get into a groove, and they mostly mess around with the texture and the effects to create this psychedelic wall of sound that envelops the entire film. And you do see that with Goblin's score for Suspiria. They're only going through maybe 2 different melodies over the course of the whole thing, so it really gets under your skin, and not in a bad way. Just like it sits with you, and you have that melodic familiarity for the entire movie. Just kind of how you have these primary colors that continue recurring the entire movie, and it allows Goblin to just mess around with the audio spectrum and different ways, different timbres of communicating this one single or two different melodies to you. Was anybody going to make any other points about the score? Because I remember the other thing I was going to say. And
just one thing to say about the score.
Do it.
And that's just that there, like Andrew was saying, there's really very few changes in the motif. There's like 3 motifs in the entire score, but it's the use of the instrumental use, I think, is interesting because it uses the tinkling of bells and then a lot of non-traditional kind of like computerized almost instruments. So they're these really unnatural sounds. It might be a guitar, but it's through perhaps some sort of filter. It could be a keyboard, but through a filter. So everything sounds like it's otherworldly. Yeah. And that also, I feel, adds to the unnerving factor because you can't place it. You can't place an instrument attached to it aside from the tinkling of bells. And at that point, that's the motif that's used when a character is in danger.
Yeah, it is so processed. It's so artificial. It's very much like the set design of the movie and the lighting of the movie. Everything is so elevated. It's on this heightened level of surreal, just like indulgence in making this movie look as gorgeous as it possibly can. That just becomes another pleasurable aspect of how this movie is put together. But I remember the thing I was going to say in relation to your comment, Andrea. So I'm going to come back to it. You mentioned the idea that you never quite know what is going to happen next while you're watching this movie because the opening kill is so out there and so operatic, as William said. And I wrote about something similar to this when I did my review of It, the new adaptation of It by Andy Muschietti a couple weeks ago. The difference between surprise and suspense in horror movies, I think that the best horror movies rely mostly on suspense, and then you have a movie like It where the monster doesn't really have any clearly defined rules attached to it, so it can kind of just jump out and do whatever it wants, whenever it wants, at whoever it wants. It can transform into whatever most scares that person, but it could also, jump out of the sink or whatever. It doesn't make any sense. There's an absurdity to it that keeps you from feeling worried because you don't know what the limitations on the monster are. In Suspiria, I think it treads that line of suspense and surprise really well. Whenever there is something crazy that happens, it is always very surprising, like a room full of barbed wire, for example, but there's always a certain suspense to it because the movie is walking through one of my favorite subgenres of horror, which is just lone people exploring an enormous, mysterious building. Like The Shining is a good example of this. House of the Devil, as well as The Innkeepers by Ty West, is a good example of this. The last act of Rosemary's Baby, the last act of Psycho are good examples of this.
Crimson Peak is
an awesome example. So when you set up that structure of like, okay, there's this creepy house, and what you see in the hallways right now does not look very scary, but things behind certain doors might be very horrifying, then you have a sense of suspense, but then you can create the surprise every time the character turns a corner. It doesn't break the reality of the film. It doesn't create any sorts of absurdity. It just makes you feel this. It's an exploratory sense of fear, as opposed to you just being. It's not the cattle prod cinema, as Mark Kermode says, where you have like the James Wan jump out at you, audio manipulation to freak you out. I do like James Wan for the most part, just for the record, but I think that this just treads such a fine line of suspense and surprise.
No, I think that's a good way of describing it for sure. As we kind of wind down, any final thoughts on Suspiria before we wrap up?
One thing that I didn't come up with this thought, but I was reading some stuff and listening to some stuff about it earlier, and I totally forgot that the very beginning of the movie, there's a narration, and it's only there for like a few seconds, and then the music kind of just overtakes it.
Right.
And I think it goes along with that fairy tale idea. Like it's almost like the narrator's like once upon a time, and then it just goes into the story, and I think where she's going through the airport before she steps out of the airport, the way the main theme is playing it, like when she looks outside, the doors will open and the main theme will play, and then they close and it's quiet again. I don't know. I think there's something interesting to that. Like it's like almost like she's stepping out of reality into this strange nightmare logic world that she's in for the rest of the movie. It's just something I hadn't thought about until this most recent rewatch I did.
Andre, did you? I thought you were trying to say something.
Oh, I just wanted to say that I think that regardless of, what's been said about it being so violent, I think it's definitely worth a watch if someone listening hasn't seen it before. But just to go in perhaps knowing that it's overly violent and to expect that. But even then, I think it's such an interesting film. And it's something unlike that's something you can see in today's, any time today. I can't think of a movie that's like it, but I can think of many movies that were inspired by it. So it's nice to see kind of the origin of a lot of movies that we see today.
I'd like to ask a question of William, if I may. So Suspiria is the only giallo movie I think I can say I've seen. And a lot of our compliments on this movie, the way that the violence is handled, the way that lighting and color is handled. I'm wondering if these are things that are truly unique to Suspiria and make Suspiria this masterpiece of a movie, or is this is the one giallo movie that Western audiences tend to watch, so we take all those things that are good about the genre and just praise Suspiria for it. Is this truly remarkable in that genre, or is there a lot that's very similar to it?
Well, I would actually say that it's not a giallo, because giallos are typically kind of like mysteries that involve like a gloved killer. Now you get shots in this that look like something from a giallo, but it's kind of like his first big departure from this, because he got started. I think his first film was Bird with the Crystal Plumage, and his next like 3 films after that are all giallos. And another thing about giallos is they usually have more intricate plots and like plot twists, and you're trying to figure out who the killer is. Like there's a lot of elements in slasher movies that came from giallos, and so they're much more like strictly plotted. And this seems like him deliberately trying to push away from that, because it's not very strictly plotted. It's not like some kind of mystery, and it's supernatural, and giallos usually don't have supernatural elements. But in terms of style, it's like it's one of the most gorgeous Italian horror films for sure, and it's a standout because I think anybody can watch it and see that there's something special about the way this movie looks and sounds. But I do think there's a lot of other Italian horror movies and giallos that come close to this, especially like Argento's other stuff, like Inferno, which is a semi-sequel to this. It pushes logic even further out the door, but it's very beautiful too. And like his other movies, Phenomena, and Deep Red. Deep Red's not quite as colorful, but it does have some set pieces that remind me of things that you see in Suspiria, just really elaborate setups for a death. It is probably like the best out of the 70s Italian horror films, but there's a lot of other gems in there, and there's they're definitely, especially Argento's stuff from the 70s and the early 80s is definitely worth checking out.
It seems like all the stuff that you're naming that would be in tight competition with Suspiria are also Argento movies. So regardless of which one you kind of see as the most important, he's in a league of his own, you would say?
I would say so. But another thing that I think is unique to Italian horror movies that carries over to a lot of other directors, especially Lucio Fulci, who did Zombie and House by the Cemetery and a lot of other films from around this time, is like he's working in the same kind of like dream logic that Argento is, but he really doubles down on the gore. And and he also has amazing scores. He works with this composer named Fabio Frizzi, and his scores are a lot like Goblin scores for Argento's films. And one thing that is interesting about how they both compose, or more probably how the director uses their music in a film, is like you'll have this really intense piece going at like full volume at full steam, and it'll just stop dead and you'll cut to the next scene, and it's very jarring. And I don't know if Fulci got it from Argento, but I don't think he did. They were both making films in the late 60s, but they both do it, and I've seen it in other Italian films too. And I think it might be a product of like they're using these musicians who aren't traditionally composers per se. They might be more like rock band, like, Goblin's a prog band. Fabio Frizzi is more of a composer, but he composes stuff that sounds like prog music. So I think they're getting these pieces and they're kind of having to put them together. Like Ennio Morricone composes that way too. Like all of the Good, Bad, and the Ugly trilogy, he got the music before the movie was completed, and then he's kind of puts it in place. So I think that's a way that they work, but it creates a similar feel in all these different movies that you could compare Suspiria to. And I guess I would say, Lucio Fulci is probably the person that comes closest to Argento in terms of like Italian horror on that level.
And we are going to watch Zombie in 2 weeks on the podcast, so we can return to this discussion at a later date.
Man, I love Zombie. We showed it at IAMS. We do movies at IAMS Nature Center, and we do a thing in October, and we showed what was the movie we showed? It might have been Shaun of the Dead. It was something much more like palatable, and I paired it with Zombie, and like pretty much everybody left like 10 minutes into the movie. But I loved it. So
well, before we close the episode, William, I wanted to turn it over to you for a few minutes to kind of give us a preview of what to expect with the horror festival this year.
Well, yeah, this was a good movie to talk about in relation to the festival, because this year's festival is very different than a lot of other ones. I picked a lot of more esoteric stuff, and Suspiria, it's like most recognized for its color, as we talked about red and blues for like an hour just now. There's a lot of films throughout the festival like that. Like there's this film Kuso that's by the Flying Lotus, and it's a very colorful and very, very challenging film. I'm excited to see an audience watch this. It's very gross and weird and funny at times, but disgusting at other times. But it's a gorgeous movie. And then we're showing Hausu, which is, from the same year as Suspiria, another film that is light on logic, but is very heavy on gorgeous visuals that are completely unlike anything else. And then some of the other films we're doing, there's a film called The Endless, which is also kind of a weird, heady film. And it's just like kind of a theme throughout the festival this year, like so much so that I really had to think about before I like locked the festival, because I was worried that, people who aren't into that type of thing as much are going to come and be like, God, what was all that? Or their brains are going to melt by the end of the weekend. But we're just going to take that chance and see what happens. But we have some more straightforward horror films too. We have a film called Better Watch Out, which I highly recommend. It's a Christmas horror film, and it's kind of a take on home invasion. but it's really smart. I can't really talk about it because of the twist in it, but it's a very smart and topical film for right now, and that's playing right after Suspiria. And other films I'm really excited about. I said The Endless is really good. I mean, all the features that we've got are excellent this year. It's probably my favorite festival I've programmed. Maybe the entire 9 years we've been doing this. And the short films, I just finished locking them like yesterday, and we've got some really amazing short films, and they really pair very well with the features. So, I mean, yeah, like, you know, if you like Suspiria, I think you would really enjoy coming to the festival this year. There's a lot of similar type films, and a lot of really gorgeous films. And if you like cinematography and weird scores, like that Flying Lotus score is very crazy. The Flying Lotus score for Kuso.
And if people aren't able to get tickets for the entire festival, it is still possible to buy tickets for individual films or specific days, right?
Yeah, that's true. We actually we were almost about to sell out of passes because we were only going to be in. We were doing something different this year where we're in different theaters, but we're actually going to be in the same large theater the whole time. So we have more full weekend passes on sale. But if you don't want to go for the whole weekend, you can buy day passes now, and if you just want to see a particular film, you can show up at Downtown West and just buy a ticket for that film if it's not sold out.
Is the schedule up for the fest yet, or is that still to come?
That's still to come. It will probably be up, I would say, next week. Okay. We just locked like yesterday. I was still tracking down some short films to add in. So, but yeah, it's locked, and we'll probably have it up pretty soon. We've got it pretty much figured out. That was a really long, rambly description of it. Sorry.
No, that's fine. For people who are interested in tickets and other information, where should they go?
Just go to KnoxvilleHorrorFest.com. On the front page, there's a link that'll take you to where you can buy tickets. And then, you know, we're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We're pretty active on all those, and we put updates on there on a daily basis.
All right. Well, that will wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Twitter at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we post all of the movies that we talked about in this episode. Next week, we will be continuing our October horror series with 1932's Freaks, which I'm very excited to see. I've heard it's a very interesting film, and I also just want to say Freaks with the Larry David voice for Curb Your Enthusiasm fans. Go Freaks! But yeah, it should be interesting. We will have on Saturday the rest of the schedule for the October Horror Fest series. The October Horror series on Cinematary.com, kind of in a similar structure as the Young Critics one. But yeah, until next time, thank you guys for listening. Oh yeah.
Actually, hey, can I say one more thing?
Go for it.
I'm opening a movie theater in Knoxville, and we take possession of the building on Sunday. So we're going to be starting construction within the next couple of weeks. And
congratulations!
Thank you, and hopefully, if loan stuff and maybe people donate more, we will be open by January. That's what we're trying to get to, but we're a little behind on funding. But regardless, we're going to be open in early 2018, and we're really excited about it. And we're going to do all kinds of films. It's not just going to be horror films. A lot of people think it's just going to be horror films because we run a horror film festival, but that's not the case. But yeah, we're really excited about it, and I think it's going to be good for Knoxville. And I hope that people who listen to your podcast and you guys are going to come out and will be excited about it too.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, check it out. It's Central Cinema, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
You can go to centralcinemanox.com and find out more about that.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's definitely. I know. We've had you on before talking about it, and Cinematary will definitely be behind that. But yeah. All right, guys. Thanks for listening. We will see you next week.